Nazism and Germany and Hitler people had been defeated in Stalingrad, in the Great Battle of Stalingrad. It was a turning point of the war. I remember it well. I was in England at the time and in London at that time. And I think it is well known that he never finished the last 2 chapters of the book. If you know the book, those last 2 chapters are rather scrappily written, and he left it for some colleagues to finish and went back to England. And because he believed that really we had, a new age was coming. He believed that the failed, the laissez-faire 19th century market capitalism was now history. He believed that we were moving into a world which he called the world of regional planning, and he wrote in the last chapter that now labor and land and money will no longer be commodities, and countries will be free to adopt the kind of domestic economic regime which is suitable to their situations, etc. And the price of necessities, of staple food will be fixed, as will the price of agricultural raw materials. Well, we know that by and large, this is not what happened. This did not even happen from 1950 to the mid-70s, although there was indeed a very important change. It was introduction of the welfare state and an enormously increased role for government and of course a very prosperous period of economic and social advancement. But nevertheless, it was not the, if you reread this, you can see that he had a great illusion at that time. But now what in the world would he have thought of what came next? What came next from 1980 to the present, which we generally call the Neoliberal Counter-Revolution, which actually rolled back so many of the gains that had been made in those first 3 decades, we know that, and produced a kind, I would suggest, a kind of a predatory form of capitalism, which is qualitatively different from what we knew in the first 3 post-war decades. It is also different from the 19th century, because not only on account of what I call the great financialization, which has reached levels that cannot even be described in numbers anymore, so on. But because you had here what is almost a conscious rolling back, a conscious effort to change the distribution of income in the direction of from labor to capital. You have now 25 years in which the median wage salary in North America has not, in real terms, has not increased. It was very largely due to the various measures of deregulation and privatization, etc., which were instituted in the 1980s and enabled enormous profits to be made, particularly in the financial, but not only, also in the other corporate sector, really at the expense of labor. And producing eventually a financial crisis, which, for the first time, I think, you're giving me 2 minutes, 5 minutes? Oh, good, no, thank you. I'm suggesting that what we are currently witnessing, and I would love some discussion of this, is a crisis, which financial, of course, but there are certain characteristics about this. One is that it has hit immensely harder in the heartlands of capitalism, Europe and North America, than it has hit any other part of the world. This is the first time that we have IMF programs in a whole host of East European countries from the Baltic to the Balkans amounting to close to $100 billion. We have also IMF programs in Mexico, which took a huge hit, Central America and the Caribbean. But for those of us that are studying development issues over this last 30 years, will find it extraordinary that there are no IMF programs anywhere in Africa. There are none anywhere else in Americas, and there are none anywhere in Asia except for countries where it is the result of war, Pakistan, Iraq, and Afghanistan, but that has nothing to do with financial crisis. So it is the countries that were most closely integrated into the financial and trade relations of the capitalist centers that have been hit the hardest. But you know that for years, programs of structural adjustment and the entire philosophy of the economic, of mainstream Washington consensus was that countries must integrate more closely, that they must liberalize finance, that they must liberalize trade, etc. But it is those countries which succeeded in not liberalizing so much their financial system, which succeeded in channeling their investment into their domestic economies, which were able to withstand the shock of this major financial crisis. And so just as my father wrote a wonderful essay called The Mechanisms of the World Economic Crisis, in which he had an interpretation of the 30s that went far beyond what you normally read about financial bubbles and overinvestment in New York and so on, because it was on the background of a total collapse of the political structures. I mean, the revolution in Russia, the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire and so on. But if we now put this financial crisis that has been, and put it onto a global scale, and see the shift of the growing points of the world economy from the north and west to east and south, global Asia and the global south, without exaggerating the fact that still the largest economies continue to be in the north, in Europe, North America. But nevertheless, when you put this into purchasing power parity terms, which give you some measure of the real production and the shift in the real production, you see an unraveling, an unwinding of the kind of dependency of the rest of the world on markets in North America and Europe that has prevailed for 100 years or so, at least from the middle of the 19th century. You are seeing a shifting of economic and political power in this world. And I must say, on that note, that I was so happy to hear. I was so encouraged by what I learned on the first day of this conference from our Brazilian colleagues and participants concerning the turn back to development, the